Good morning and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. With me today, I am very pleased and honored to have with me Scotty Claus. He is the founder of the Living Christmas Tree Company. Welcome, Scotty. Oh, I'm super happy to have you here. I love that we get to see you in this form, with your hat and everything. And for those that are not watching the video cast, but maybe just tuned into the podcast, it's worth a view to check out Scotty Claus. And so, for those not familiar, Scotty, could you just give our listeners and viewers your 30-second pitch? What is the Living Christmas Tree Company?
Yeah, thank you. Started back when I was it was on my younger years when I used to deliver or cut Christmas trees, and I was so excited about doing so because everyone was really happy, and it meant that Christmas had arrived in their house. But then seeing those trees afterwards thrown by the wayside just felt not right. And so, having worked at a nursery, I was like, why don't we rent living Christmas trees instead so they can go on living afterwards? And from there, we've just continued to build the company and to look at all the different ways we can look at making this a full cycle kind of company.
Wow. Okay, so you were inspired by the holidays and by seeing all the trees around. I have that visual in my head. I'm from New York, so I visualize them on the sides of the street next to the garbage after the day after, the week after the holidays, and there's so many. Um, and you're right, that is very inspirational to see that and to say, how do we fix this? Because they are living things. So, when you first came up with this idea, how long ago was that?
So I started, I, I mean, early 2000s started like giving my friends different trees. Like there'd be an avocado tree or, something. You'd figure out what can be inside for what amount of time. And our first sort of like official test year, I think, was in 2006 or 2007. And then our launch year was like 2008, 2009, where we were actually doing, 100 to 200 trees and kind of kept growing from there.
Wow. And so, before this, you were working in a nursery. You were not an entrepreneur, is that correct?
Actually, I had a design company as well. So I did landscape design. Started that when I was 17 years old. But yeah, also was working in a nursery, so doing a bunch of different things.
So, you were able to take the skill set that you learned by working in another company, combining it with the skills you got at 17 by starting your own landscape company, which is really amazing too, to build this company.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exciting. So, and then, I mean, there's so much to dig into here. So first, I'm curious, so talk to me about the process of the Christmas tree, because this is meant to be more sustainable. It's to uh, make sure that there's less waste by the side, less killing of trees. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so there's a couple different pieces, and we try not to get into the conversation of either saving a tree or carbon footprint, and really have a conversation around awareness of how do we treat things that we think have value in our society, and how do we build on that value. So instead of something that's like, for example, you wouldn't go inside to your front yard and cut down a tree to bring it in for 3 weeks. Or does a plastic tree really have the same meaning to you as a real tree does? And so, how do we speak to value really, and meet that in a way that's sort of feels more in alignment with why we celebrate in the first place?
Okay, so it's less about, I mean, I think sustainability comes along for the ride, but what you're saying is if you're not going to do that in your front yard, which I never really thought about until you said it, and I wouldn't do that, so why would you do that, any other time of year? That sounds crazy almost,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that, and I hear you. And I do think, though, that there's people that live in apartments that are not even, that's not even on their radar, right? Like I
Hmm.
grew up in an apartment in Manhattan. I mean, I wasn't going to go to Central Park, but to go there were no Christmas trees there anyway. But
Sure.
to grab a tree. But so for those folks, I think, is the conversation still the same, or does it? It's still about the meaning of Christmas, but is the impetus to get there a little different?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in some ways even more so for folks living in an apartment who are perhaps a little bit detached from nature. And there are folks who do use our service just because we have elves that bring a tree into your house and then pick it back up again afterwards. And so there's a convenience factor for being able to have something living in your home. And it's a completely different experience having something alive in your home that's sort of giving back. There's a reciprocity that happens with a living tree that just doesn't exist with either a dead or an artificial tree. That something that's slowly dying in the corner versus something that is plastic in the corner, or something that's actually alive. And you'll see the trees kind of breathing as they dry out, or you water them. You'll see during different times of the day that the tree moves. And so that experience is not something that a lot of people get to have. And so, especially living in an apartment, how would you get it? Living in Southern California, you're not going to put a tree on top of your Prius to get it to your house. And so we provide that opportunity through our elves, and then pick it back up for you again.
And then, so what do you do? Okay, so where's the tree coming from initially?
Yeah, so we have a yard in Torrance, a partnership with a nursery there who they retail some of the trees in the front end, and we use the back end of their nursery to deliver the trees out of. They get delivered, and then when they come back, for most of the trees we donate. So many people are aware of the fires in California, and so we really reach out to folks who have experienced that and allow them to pick up trees for free because they work really well for windbreaks and for erosion and things like that after the season.
So, so how are they maintaining these trees? How are they arriving to be able to be, kept alive, etc.?
Yeah, so they're mostly grown in pots, which helps with the stress of a tree being moved around. So they're grown in a pot, so they stay in that pot. Some trees we will keep and shift to larger pots. Some of our other varieties are dug from the ground and then put into a pot. And so that's how they stay alive, is that they've got all the roots and everything like that. And so it's just a matter of watering them and kind of maintaining them.
What would you say at the end of this? What percentage of the trees are in good condition and able to be um,
We use,
donated
yeah,
or
we
reused?
plan for between 5 and 10% to come back crispy. Sometimes that's because some folks forget to water. That's one thing. Another is during the holidays, some people keep their house nice and toasty, and depending upon where you're keeping that tree, it's incompatible with an indoor living experience. So, and then there's also a factor of something being alive, and there's always a risk with moving it and stress that the tree just doesn't make it. Everyone has the experience of moving an indoor plant just from one part of the room to another, and the plant's like, ah! And so imagine now it's moving from my nursery into your home and then back to the nursery. And so that shock factor also plays into it. And it's one of the challenges of having I call it, have living people delivering living trees. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of variables that can impact that.
Even in my garden, if I did try to move a tree. I tried to move two. One it worked, one it did not work. And even when you bring them back from the nursery, sometimes they just don't do well in different environments. The tree behind me is a second tree. The first one I had was a fig that did not do well in here. I don't know. Maybe it was just because it was just trying to get acclimated. I tried to give it a few months. I don't know how long one needs to give it, but I feel like that's part of dealing with living things. So, as you started to grow this business, um, did you even think? I mean, I don't know if this was part of the conversation, but like changing the narrative to how we think about it and how we treat living things, as well as, and I know you said you steer clear of this, but I mean, I'm curious. Did you look at and forward think the impact that you could have potentially by not killing trees? I mean, yes, it's a much more human way to deal with something, like just on a personal level. When you say it to me, I was like, now I can't imagine killing a tree, right? Now that you put that out there. But I will say, to think about the larger picture, to say, okay, well, now if we could do this and everyone did this, how many trees would we save, right? How much, how would that impact our environment and the planet?
Yeah, and just creating that awareness, right, of something that used to just be thrown away, that it continued to live. I remember one time I had a reporter ask a child, and they kind of leaned down and said, "Do you know why this tree is so special?" And the child looked at him and said, "No." And the reporter was sort of stunned for a second, and I said, "Well, that's because to a child, this makes sense." the idea of
Right.
cutting down a tree doesn't make sense. So you don't have to explain to a child why this works. And so imagine if you had a whole generation of children growing up as this is the standard of how they do things. And so that those we have trees that are grown locally that are the lonely environment continue to grow. And so we're not doing monocultures of trees in one far off location that are shipped to another location and then thrown away. And so if we were able to interrupt that stream of energy and make it more localized and employ more people locally, then it really could have a serious impact.
And I think you could expand on a global level even to larger cities where delivery is the norm. Like if you get a tree in New York City, they have delivery. You don't buy it on the Upper West Side generally to get it to the Lower East Side. You buy it they have like parks where people do it. They have different bodegas where they sell them. I mean, I can picture it right now. But I don't. It's not usual and customary to see them in a pots. And there are lots of places to go buy plants in the plant district, etc. So I think there's an opportunity to expand this conversation and to explore that in different places. And so, as you built this business, did I hear correctly? There was a Shark Tank moment.
Yeah, yeah, that was back in 2012, um, and that did I think a lot for the industry of, you know, changing the narrative with farmers that you can, if you grew them in pots instead of cutting them. And since then, there's a lot of different like little companies that have sprouted out that do this. So I'm excited to see that and the growth and just, being able to shift the conversation is really important.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And I was, my first question when I was learning about this was, well, if you're renting a tree and you're pulling it out, are you actually replanting it? But you're not, because you're bringing it in the pot, which takes away the concern that I had about replanting, because
Mhm.
replanting can be a little bit more challenging for trees.
That's right. That's
And
right.
then you could lose more that way.
Correct.
So, can you share with me any stories, like as you were building this and as you were navigating this industry, which people are used to buying their tree, getting rid of it, um, what was some of the responses that you got from folks as you tried to communicate this new way of thinking and to get them on board and to explore, having a tree delivered in a pot and then picked up, renting it effectively?
Yeah. I'll tell you one of the ones is like, so it's always a bit of a challenge, the logistics of the company, and we have such a short window. In one particularly difficult year, I got a handwritten letter from a woman, and it was a picture of a tree and her baby swaddled underneath the tree. And she's like, I'm so proud that this is a tradition that my child's going to grow up knowing. And to me, that was like everything. And I was like, yeah, we have to keep going. We have to keep, talking about this and creating more awareness around it. So that's one of the visions that's kept me going through the years.
Yeah, and I love the way that I might have said this already, so apologies if I'm being redundant. But I do love how you talk about changing the narrative for people versus, focusing on the sustainability aspect. Not that that's not equally as important, but if you think about the chicken and the egg, if you can change the people's narrative, almost people they're not gonna be looking for that. They're not gonna want that. They're not gonna go for that because they couldn't imagine killing a living thing. So if we start this with the next generation and then the next generation, I could see that this maybe one day people will not be killing trees.
Well, and even in all of those processes, there's levels of awareness we can create about asking the question of where is this coming from? How is it being raised? What's sustainability? What is the embodied energy in what we're doing? And not fooling ourselves into sort of this greenwashing awareness, and what is the actual impacts of our behaviors. And so when we can make those slight shifts and not, I think, lecture people on environmental things and get into stuck into these arguments around carbon footprints, but really bring it to a level of awareness and helping people to actually celebrate in a way that they value themselves, then I think that's where real shift happens.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, it's part of the reason we create this platform is not to tell people what to do, but to share with them different points of view, different ideas, different ways of thinking about things so that they can make a more informed choice for themselves. Whatever that choice is, they at least have greater access to information to level the playing field, right? Um, so for me, that was super important, and I understand for you what was super important was, building a socially conscious, focused business. Um, and so, can you talk to me a little bit about that and what that was like when you realized that that was what your focus is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the good and the bad news about capitalism is it doesn't care, which means it's not that capitalism is out to destroy the environment. It's basically there to make money. And so if
Right.
you can replace the mechanism by which it makes money with something that is beneficial for the environment, it'll continue to do that. And so I think a lot of folks, sort of rail against the system, and there are ways that we can work within the system and create meaningful jobs, which can also translate into being purposeful. So through the holidays, we give people work, and we specifically seek out folks that need help through the holidays and are available for working because they struggle. And so being able to also look at how do we use our labor practices and how do we do all these other pieces can other ways where we can create impact. And so those are different ways of using the market and the social entrepreneurial way of looking at things about how do you create value and how do you impact lives.
Do you feel like you're lucky, or do you feel like it was a choice to be able to do something that gives you the opportunity to be that social entrepreneur that's so meaningful to you?
Yeah, it's I chuckle a little bit with luck because I'm sure a lot of social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general would at times not say that they feel lucky to be purpose driven and mission driven. It feels more like again a level of awareness of once you've seen how something can go differently, it's very difficult for me in particular to do it differently. So once you can see how you can make a positive impact, then it becomes a standard for how I want to live at all times and how do I want to help other people and sort of invite them into the same level of awareness. So I'm not sure lucky necessarily comes into it, but certainly feels like a commitment.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's in some ways I feel like it's a gift for me, like that I found something that sparks my interest, that keeps me motivated to be able to impact the world so positively and equally make a living.
Yeah, I
Um,
would absolutely agree. And it's a little bit of how I talk about our experience on Shark Tank, which is like, did it make great business sense and did it, make a ton of money? No, but as an experience of how to, talk about the work I do and to have an enriching experience that, I get to grow as a person in my own practice and an ability to talk about something in a different way. Absolutely.
because you're motivated to build, and be part of a social entrepreneurship endeavor. So, what are some of those challenges that you face as a founder?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll offer a bit of insight. And one of the challenges was me and um, wanting to be, the Scotty Claus character who is always giving and always jolly comes with some limitations. And so some years I was a limitation for the organization because I would lean too far that direction and not quite frankly look at what the business needs to be successful. And so that took some work to get over that. And I would say I'm still not great at it, but improving. The other part is it's challenging to work with people, and when we choose to work with folks who have their own challenges, it can be very rewarding, and it can also be very challenging. I create
Yeah.
personal relationships with all of my elves and everyone we work with, and as those who work in with marginalized populations and with folks who really do need this work, they struggle. And so disappointment is another piece that you have to learn to get good at. And some people won't show up because of some of those challenges. And then I need to then explain to folks why their Christmas tree is going to be late. And I can't tell them the real reason why.
Right.
It's just because I didn't plan properly. And so some of those real awarenesses, it takes thick skin, and I still have a commitment to keeping an open heart around all of it. So those are some of the challenges that are both emotional and business at the same time.
And so now, knowing what you know and having the years of experience that you have behind you now doing this, What are some of the things, or maybe some of the tools that you've instituted to make that a little bit more successful for yourself, a little bit easier to deal with, that you could share with both our viewers and our listeners?
Yeah, so you'll notice my name, for example. So Scotty Claus, I go by that, as does every one of the elves has their own Christmas name. And so we call each other by a Christmas name and we greet each other. And we really, even in all of our communication, constantly remind ourselves and our customers that we're talking about Christmas, we're talking about a Christmas tree. And some things could feel like an emergency. It's not really an emergency. If it can be solved by money or time, then we're not really talking about a problem here.
Right.
And so we can embody that. And so I both have a one of the challenges is you have a symbol that means a lot to a lot of people, which is both good and challenging. If you've have a tree decorating party, around the tree arriving, and that tree doesn't arrive, it's disappointing to people, and they let us know about it. And it's part of our job is to sort of both understand and be compassionate and remind folks that we're talking about a tree. And so
Right.
being able to hold both things is really important.
As a founder, I think that sometimes we do have to adjust, and some of these lessons that you're sharing and the tools that you're sharing are really helpful for the narrative around building a social entrepreneurship, right? Community.
That's right. That's right.
Um, and so, do you look at them as equally as important when you look at making money and having an impact?
Yeah, I mean, I beyond a part in my life or my career that I'm willing to do anything that isn't impactful for money. So yeah, so that just becomes a standard that I live by, and everything else comes from there.
So, for those folks that are celebrating the holidays in California, because you're in California, what impact do you hope to change within California as it relates to the holidays?
So in terms of, in Southern California, particularly in Southern California, because we have such a temperate climate, it does get more challenging in climates where things freeze because bringing the tree inside, it thinks it's springtime. And so then you bring it out and it freezes, it can impact the tree more negatively. You have to actually protect the tree a little bit. But in Southern California, there really is no reason why we couldn't be doing this across the board and why this couldn't be the way that people do Christmas trees in general. And we could, you know, play with a whole bunch of different types of varieties and really kind of change the entire narrative how these spaces do this.
Oh, you mean think beyond the pine and the oh my God, now I can't even remember that Douglas fir and the whatever else.
Yeah, and so some of those varieties don't even grow here, so we don't want to import something that's not going to be successful. And so choosing varieties that can actually grow in Southern California is also important.
I mean, I'm sorry, I think a lemon tree would be fun.
Totally. We've used different topiary trees. I've used fruit trees, like avocados. We said so you can shape anything into a Christmas tree, or just say this is my Christmas tree, right?
Okay, so you're at a point in your career where you're able to do good and make an impact and do what you want in life and drive that result. So if you're looking forward a few years, what do you hope to see, um, both for this industry as well as your company?
Yeah. So this is, as you alluded to, sort of just of one of the facets of what I do, and my real job. I'm do international peace building. And so how we work with communities is also using the social entrepreneurial approach. So this is one part of that belief system of being able to practice what I talk about when I work with communities around the world of how to use social entrepreneurship for long-term growth and gain and social cohesion.
Wow, that's amazing. There's so many other questions I have, but they're really not relevant for this podcast. So we're going to have to explore those further because I'm certainly interested. But for those that are building or want to build a social entrepreneur environment for themselves, to think socially minded as an entrepreneur, are there maybe three tips you might recommend for them?
Yeah, I would think, you know, I think the cliche one is understanding your why, but understanding what's your personal investment into that, not just the why for the marketplace, but what's the why for me? And so understanding where I might get caught up of. And sometimes the question is, how can my own passion sometimes disqualify me from being the best person to be leading this company? I think that's an important question to have. I think there's another question of how do I know when it's not working? And making that decision ahead of time and sharing that with others that can ask you questions like, is this still working or not? And then also have an idea of what's the life cycle of the business, of when does it end, and how does it keep growing without you? And so really asking yourself those questions ahead of time, I think, is really, really important.
Wow, I think those are really useful, things to consider for people as they're building their business, even as people are into their businesses, to just resurface those questions because things change, our perspectives change, our experience change, and it's good to always check in. So I really appreciate you, resurfacing those, bringing those to the top for the folks listening and tuning in. So for those folks, because I'm assuming you're in Southern California, because you've mentioned that a few times, that are in Southern California that would like to rent a tree, what is the best way for them to go about doing that?
So all the sales go through our website. It's livingchristmas.com. I think there are still probably a handful of trees left. Up, probably up until next week, we'll have trees available. So, and if they happen to be sold out, go ahead and get on our mailing list, and we'll be sure to let you know ahead of time so you can get a tree.
How far in advance do people get trees if you're already sold out? Are these pre-planned for next week delivery? Because it seems like that's a very long time to
Oh,
have.
I get folks starting to ping me in August to
And
make sure they
so,
get a Christmas tree.
but because they pinged you, does that mean when are you delivering that tree?
We don't deliver until the weekend after Thanksgiving because there's only so long the tree can live inside the house.
Right. Okay.
But typically by the end of November, we're sold out of those trees because there's only so many trees where we can do within 2 week period. And before we used to do 1,500 trees to 2,000 trees, and it was just mayhem. So we've reduced that significantly just to several hundred trees.
Okay. Well, for those folks, if you're interested, it sounds like he's got a few left. So make sure to tune in. Make sure to check our show notes for his link. Scotty, thank you so much for joining me today on this special holiday series that we're having about building a more sustainable holiday and providing sustainable gift ideas for people and just living more sustainably. And I know that while that is not your thing, we do hope that this conversation inspires people to change the way they think about it, which will then hopefully have a greater and more lasting effect than just thinking in the moment. Think long term, think big. So thank you folks for tuning in today. If you are watching this video, don't forget to follow us and listen to us on Spotify or iTunes at Essential Ingredients or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're listening to this podcast but want to watch the video, you can find us at Next Gen Purpose on YouTube and go to the Essential Ingredients tab. So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're here every week.